Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Momentous Inspiration Season 4 reaction video. I'm Brian Will, and I'm going to be covering the engineers today. So I don't have very extensive engineer experience, but we have lacked an engineer player in our meta. So since I've tried them out a couple of times and played against them a number of times when we used to have a more regular one, I figured I would try to give these guys as best of a breakdown as I could. Engineers are one of the guilds that saw a little bit less change comparatively. They definitely were not a full rebuild in the vein of Alchemist, nor even really rebuilt as much as a faction like Farmers. But they did see some changes across core models, mostly bringing them in line with where Steamforged felt like they should be. So I'll try to break them down as best as I can and give some thoughts about where I think the guild's going to be. So starting off, we're going to go through Ballista. Ballista really saw very little change, relatively speaking. He got hit with the second wind change, as did other models like Decimate, as well as the fact that he lost the knockdown on Breach, his legendary play. But otherwise really stayed primarily intact. There was not a lot of change to him. He's not going to function any differently than he had previously. He's still going to be a control piece, using Deadbolt and Minefield to cause knockdowns and damage. He still has a pretty solid kick stat, and he's a really good goal threat on his legendary in particular. I think Ballista is still in exactly the same place he was. I think he's still a solid captain, and I think you'll see him basically for the same matchups and for the same reasons as you saw Ballista in Season 3. I think you might see a few modified lineups with Ballista, including the introduction of players like Salvo or Veteran Velocity more often, but those are more due to the changes on those players and not as much due to Ballista, so I'll break them down more later. So next up we got Penvice. Penvice has seen a little bit of playbook change, mostly gaining a non-momentous push dodge on the 3 instead of having a 1 damage momentous dodge on the 3 and losing the 1 push dodge on the 4. However, the bigger changes have come to her character plays, which no longer need to target Mechanica models, and they also do not cause damage at the end of an activation. So she's no longer damaging her own models to give them the buffs, which is straight up a buff to Penvice herself. It makes her a little bit easier and a little bit less risky to use, especially putting those buffs on herself, since she only has 11 HP, that she really needs every little bit that she has. She still keeps close control and reanimate, but they simplified her by taking out her heroic play, Mechanical Heart, and just simply making her legendary the first time that each friendly model receives a pass, they can make another pass. There's nothing really else to it. They just simplified it considerably so that you didn't have to deal with all the different effects, making sure there were Mechanica models, that kind of thing. However, the big downside that has occurred for Penvice is that deletion no longer affects character plays. It's only playbook damage results. So now you're going to have to be engaged to actually be gaining the benefit of deletion. Players like Salvo, who have that strong set of character plays, can't really benefit from deletion if they're just shooting across the board. So that part is a considerable downgrade. It changes the way that her team has to play. However, I think the simplification overall is a little bit of a blessing to her because it will make her easier to put on the field, as there are just simply fewer parts that you've got to build together. I think that Ballista is probably still going to see more play than Penvice, but I think she does still have her uses. Moving on to Mainspring. Mainspring has seen a little bit of buffing going on. He's looks pretty similar overall, except that his kick stat is now 4-4 instead of 3-4, which is definitely a buff in regards to Long Bomb, because that extra dice does help give you a higher level of assurance on the kicks. His Overheat no longer affects friendly guild models, and he also gained the character play Thief, which allows him to steal the ball from a target enemy model within 1 inch. So if he gets within 1 inch, he does have a viable way to steal the ball that cannot be counterattacked, and then long bomb the ball back out. I don't know how many players will play Mainspring in comparison to Mother. Mother still has the benefit that she does put down her nest markers, even though they can now be removed from the pitch. But Mainspring definitely feels like a more viable choice. He has a particular use, and his long bomb is going to be more reliable than it has been in the past. So Mother has seen a couple of changes, but overall is a relatively similar model. The front of her card really has seen very little change. She still got the same playbook as she did previously, and she still has Burrow. Although Burrow has changed so that it no longer removes the nest marker, which is a bit of a big change, especially because the nest markers are now destroyable. However, she also no longer gets an attack once she comes up from the burrow, so it's been side graded a little bit. On the back of the card, some of the text was simply removing multiple sentences from traits. Spiderling used to be a part of Spider Nest. That's the part that causes a crowding effect. But Spider Nest now specifies, like I said, that the nest markers can be destroyed, which is a major change because you could simply cause a bunker or you could severely interfere with angles just by putting down a nest marker in the way previously. I think that Steamforge wanted to actually bring these in line with what you see out of Harvest markers and did not want something on the pitch that was non-interactable. So I think this is a good change. I think that it's going to be frustrating for some engineer players because they're not going to have their little protected spot. But I think overall, with Steamforge's goals, it's right in line. So since we got the captain and mascots out of the way, we're going to get into the squaddies, and we'll start off with Colossus, the big man himself. Colossus's primary changes have really occurred on his playbook. They've simplified his playbook somewhat, moving some of the abilities around, including moving the knockdown push to the second column instead of just having the knockdown there. And they've raised his top end damage a little bit, putting in a non-momentous 4 result where he only had 3 before. However, I think the change that will probably stick out the most is that he now has a Momentous singled out on column 1. Previously, it was non-momentous and could occasionally feel like a consolation prize. Having it momentous at least helps you start building that stack, even if you have to take it when you didn't want to. But I think it's a good solid buff for him. Moving to the back of the card, he still has close control, still has light-footed, still has tough hide, and he still has stoic, but he did lose long legs. He no longer grabs the ball when he's within 2 inches of it in the same manner that he used to. So that's a bit of a nerf, I guess. I don't know how often it would actually matter, but at the times that it did matter and allowed you to have a different way that you could move the model, including maybe not having to swerve quite as far outward, it was definitely a good thing. So a little bit of a nerf, but I don't think it's going to change how much he's seen. Alright, so next we have Compound the Keeper. There's not a lot to say about Compound. I've also talked to him about him a little bit in the Alchemist video, but functionally he hasn't really changed that much. His playbook has dropped a little bit. He doesn't have the tackle with 1 damage on the second column anymore, probably because nobody really ever took it. And he did lose chemical resist, but he still has Horrific Odor, Rush Keeper, Noxious Death, now Resilience instead of Gluttonous Mast. The 2 big changes on the back are that Noxious Death no longer affects friendly models, and Resilience can be used on or while he is making an advance, so it does provide some protection. I think overall he's going to be used in exactly the same places. There's nothing that's really changed his role substantially. He's a good keeper. He provides a good resource when you're trying to protect against goal scoring teams. I think when you want him, when you wanted him before in Season 3, you're still going to take him in Season 4. Simple as that. So next we move on to the Hat, who went from being a adult male that looked like he was rather tall to a short lady. I'm just not going to ask. Her only change really is that Sucker Punch is no longer triggered off the Guild Vault on her playbook. I think that change was probably made primarily due to the interactions with Hoist and the number of Sucker Punches you could get out very easily, especially when combined with Tooled Up. I think they felt that created an abusive situation probably, and so they simply took off the Sucker Punch from the playbook. I think that's probably going to let her see a little bit less play. I think that was one of her primary interesting uses. And unfortunately, I'm not sure, unless you receive and you're going to be passing the ball around and wanting to build up momentum, I don't know how much you're going to see her play this, especially in comparison to a lot of the very strong guild members that engineers already have. So sadly, I have to say that I do feel like she's been nerfed a bit, and I think that will probably take her out of some lists, although I do think that she does still bring some interesting free effects to the board. I just don't know when you have to select from that really pretty solid engineer squad how valuable she's going to end up feeling. So speaking of the man who caused abusive situations, next up we have Hoist. Hoist has seen a little bit of playbook change, losing a couple of combined damage and pushing and dodging effects off of his playbook, but otherwise it's relatively intact. The empty front of his card seems to look like he does not have any character plays, but functionally his real character play, True Replication, just simply moved to the back of his card instead. They're no longer feeling the need to put a character play up there just to take up the space. I think that Hoist, especially since he lost Tough Hide off the back of his card, will be a bit less resilient, a little bit easier to kill, which I'm pretty sure that the majority of people that don't play engineers will be thankful for. But I think he's still going to see the same role. True Replication and the ability to duplicate is still really strong, especially since you can get tooled up on him. He still has Reanimate, so he's not that easy to kill at 4-1 and with Sturdy. I don't know if he'll be quite as much of an auto selection as he was in Season 3, but I think that's probably a good thing because he was literally the first pick for a lot of people. Engineers had such a logjam of having at least 2 or 3 models that they were going to select into literally every single list. I think if Hoist is no longer an auto include, but one that you take when you have a specific purpose in mind, that's a definite improvement. So I think he'll still get played. I think he's still fine. I'm not an experienced enough engineer player, unfortunately, to be able to predict how much, but I'll be curious to see that going forward. Moving on from Hoist, we'll go to our next mechanical model, which is Locus, one of the models that unfortunately very rarely saw the field during Season 3. He's still got the exact same stat line. His character plays are only slightly different, with remote control costing 1 instead of 2. And he's seen a little bit of playbook change, but that was mostly creating a couple of options on the top end of his playbook that I don't think will probably come up in most cases. On the back of his card, the main thing that he has seen is instead of having Stoic, he now has Tough Hide. So he can be pushed around a little bit easier, but he will be a little bit harder to kill, which for a model that was supposed to be a tank kind of makes perfect sense. He didn't even have to lose any HP in the trade. I think Locus still is basically going to be functionally the same. He's still looking to do the exact same, have the exact same effect on the board. I just don't know how well he's going to do it. He's got a Momentous knockdown on 1. He's got some easy pushes early on, but the simple fact is he's a bit slow. His character plays are a bit expensive, and you still have a lot of other good models in Guild. I really wish that I could have a little bit different opinion on this, but especially since he doesn't have Stoic anymore, since he can be moved around, push dodges have an effect again. I just don't know how often he'll be on the pitch. So maybe I'm wrong there, but I feel like he's still kind of just a step behind so many of the other engineers models, particularly with some of the upgrades that were picked up going from Season 3 to Season 4. Going back to the humans for just a second, we got Ratchet up next. There's not really a lot to say. He has almost exactly the same card. He lost a 1 damage off of his double push on the top of his playbook, and he can no longer make mainspring if he's been taken out, but otherwise, he's identical. I think that Ratchet's still going to be an auto-include for a lot of people, simply because Tooled Up is so strong. I don't think there's much more to throw out there. I think he's still good. I think that he's still useful. He's got a good character trait. He's got Overclock still on the back of his card. I don't think there's much more to say. I think you'll still see a lot of lineups. Salvo, on the other hand, is going to see a lot more play, I do believe. I'm not going to break down everything because Steamforge broke it down in their blog, but he picked up a little bit more damage on his playbook, and they changed his character plays a little bit around so that he no longer has Flurry, but he picked up Forward Bolt, which I think is arguably a bit of an upgrade, and that I think the knockdown is going to be much more useful. His Swift Strikes takes him 2 inches, and his Heroic play means that he can use a character play anytime during the activation instead of the next character play. I think Salvo's exactly what you want him to be, really. He's basically still just as strong at what he was doing before, if not a little bit stronger. He's got a useful set of character plays, and he makes really good use of an influence stack and a momentum. So I think especially for a gun line or for having a quick player that can stick to the outsides of the pitch and get wherever he needs to be, he's in a perfect spot. I really don't think that he will be shunted to the side nearly as bad as he was in season 3. I'll be curious to see how much all those effects add up to, especially once the scrum matches up, but I think he's much better. I think he's still a solid piece, and I will be really excited to see what he can bring to the field. Stepping up to the Mechanica models, for the next to last time, we're going to go into Velocity. Velocity's playbook is almost identical. She lost a double dodge on column 3 because she already had a tackle double dodge there, so they just simply simplified the column. She still has the same character plays. She did lose 2 health, but she still also got the same traits on the back of her card, Close Control and Reanimate. I don't think there's functionally anything different about Velocity. I think you're going to use her for the exact same reasons you did before. You're going to want her as a scorer, as a quick ball holding piece that's hard to take out. And that's still what she is. I think she's a good model. There's not a lot more to say about her. She'll be a good striker that will probably see a good bit of play. The only reason that she might not see quite as much play will actually have to do more with the next model, her veteran version. So with Veteran Velocity, we'll finish off the Engineers. She is probably the most changed model in the guild. I think it's probably not even a question. She still has a few of the same playbook effects, including some push dodges, some double dodges, but functionally has changed tremendously in many ways. She is now oriented towards being a striker. She's got a 4-8 kick instead of her 4-6, and she's a 5-0 again, similar to her original model, and has lost some hit points as a result. She also lost her aggressive defense and smash shins in favor of picking up Route 1, the model that's on Veteran Brisket, that lets her make a jog directly towards an enemy model. I think that those plays, especially Route 1, is going to be really beneficial when you're trying to chase down the ball, trying to get a little bit of extra mobility, which is something that in many ways the Engineers don't have that much of. They have a couple of speed-up mechanisms, but I think this one will really allow some ball chasing or allow her to move across the pitch faster. On the back of her card, Lend a Hand and Reanimate. Reanimate's pretty normal for a lot of the Mechanica models, although her veteran version didn't have it in Season 3 for some reason. But with Lend a Hand, that's one that I think is a bigger help, because especially if she's not chasing the ball down or if you're trying to ball kill, she's now going to be providing more help to the other players on the team, which is particularly useful in the places where they have momentous damage results or where they're trying to get a kill in general. I think that she's going to see quite a bit more play, well, which is not hard because she saw almost no play in Season 3. I'm not sure if I think she's a better striker than Velocity 1, but I think she is a different striker. She provides a different tool to the set. So I think both of them are going to have their uses and both of them will see the pitch. I think that one's going to be a bit of a personal preference, which is really what I would hope for. That allows players to modify their playstyle and their draft based on what they would like to play, rather than what's the optimal play in a very objective sense. I'm excited that they touched her up. I'm excited that they switched her around a little bit and made her a more engaging model, especially because Compound, I think, personally, was a better striker already in the first place. Or, excuse me, not striker, goalkeeper. I think he was a better goalkeeper, and I don't think that it left Velocity much of a niche. I think that she kind of got left on the outs because of that. So now she's a much more interesting model who will be fielded, I would imagine, a pretty good amount of the time. So I think from reading through the Engineers cards and everything I've seen, that Engineers are functionally basically the same team as they were in Season 3 in a lot of ways. They have a couple of new tools, but I don't see any major playstyle differences occurring. They really will still take certain models like Ratchet. I think Colossus will still have the same role as he had before. I think so will Hoist, although he's not quite as easy. He's a little bit easier to kill than he used to be. The biggest question is going to be how Engineers compare to some of the heavily revamped guilds, particularly thinking of some like Morticians with Scalpel, Alchemists, and maybe some of the damage output on Farmers. I'm not really sure. They still have the exact same playstyle, and that control might be enough. But unfortunately, I'm not really experienced enough with Engineers to say. I do think they look like, if you enjoyed them in Season 3, you're still going to enjoy them. If you want a controlling game style where you're using character plays from a long range to affect the pitch, that's still going to have the exact same appeal it had before. So I think they're still interesting. I think they still look fun. And I'm still kind of interested in giving them a little bit further try in Season 4 once I've kind of tried out some of the other guilds that I've practiced with. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and thank you very much for watching our videos. We also will have some more coming out, if they are not already out at the time you're listening to this, trying to get a few more of the local Raleigh players, getting their takes on their guild so that we don't have to have too much of an inexperienced view of things. So I hope you'll keep watching, and have a good one.